Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Steve Lance. And breaking earlier today, President Biden has dropped out of the presidential race, saying he will finish out the remainder of his term, but says his re-election bid is over, endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democratic Party nomination today. Biden says it's been the greatest honor of his life serving as president. He says he's standing down for the best interest of the party and the country. Calls for Biden to drop out as the party nominee have been building over the past weeks. Some Democratic donors, lawmakers, and celebrities started scrutinizing him after his debate against former President Trump. More than 36 House Democrats and 5 senators urging the president to drop out. The president has been dealing with a third case of COVID-19 on top of the pressure from the campaign. Biden has vowed to stay in the race. Despite rumors he might be stepping down, he's won more than 3,800 delegates in the Democratic primary elections to date. The president says he'll speak to the nation later this week to explain his decision in greater detail. Biden wrote on X, the best decision he's made was picking Kamala Harris as vice president. The president wrote today, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Let's do this. Vice President Kamala Harris says she intends to earn and win the Democratic nomination. She thanked Biden for his leadership as president and his decades of service to the country. Harris called the president's decision a selfless and patriotic act. She wrote his legacy surpasses that of many presidents who have served 2 terms in office. Harris commended the president for his commitment to his faith and family. The vice president says she's honored to have Biden's endorsement, vowing to hit the campaign trail and win in November. And joining us now, we have A. Scott Bolden. He's the former chair of the Washington, D.C. Democratic Party and a former New York Assistant District Attorney. A. Scott, thank you so much for joining.
Good evening.
Right off the top, you have been following this, obviously. Did you think that we would hear so soon from the President of the United States not to run and seek re-election?
Well, I expected a decision like most of us this weekend with the president having COVID and all the 3 weeks of pressure that's been on the president and the Democrats. Something had to give. My mother used to say, well, if you're going to get going, you better get to getting. And that's how I felt about the Democrats and this race. It feels like the race was slipping away from us because we were fighting ourselves versus the GOP and Donald Trump. This is a sad day for America in the sense that we are seeing a countryman and a statesman step down who was given 50 years of public service, an outstanding public servant, regardless of your politics, very well respected. And so, I feel energized as a Democrat now because the issue of age and mental acuity is no longer on the ballot as far as Joe Biden is concerned. We're going to get behind Kamala Harris and move forward. And she's the best position to prosecute the case against Donald Trump and the GOP and Project 2025. And so I'm excited about the future, and most Democrats are. If there's a floor fight, so be it. But, you know, the Democrats have always been a fractured group no matter what. We come together at the last minute, though, because that's just our nature.
A. Scott Bolden, as you mentioned, getting behind Kamala Harris for president. You obviously have President Biden endorsing her today. Bill and Hillary Clinton also endorsing, but notable folks that issued statements that have not endorsed her. Obviously, former President Barack Obama. You have Leader Jeffries, Leader Schumer of the Democrats in Congress, also not throwing their weight behind Kamala just yet. Talk to us about the factions within the Democrats and how this may actually play out.
Well, there are factions who would like to leapfrog Kamala Harris. The same factions that wanted Biden to get out, they really wanted Biden and Harris to get out, right? Whether they're money donors or whether they're House of Representatives or whether they're senators or Democratic political operatives, that's okay, because in the end, with those types of endorsements, Kamala Harris makes the most sense for a couple reasons. One, she keeps the $240 million if the delegates get behind her and Biden has endorsed her, so those delegates for Biden, those 1,900, are more than likely going to go to Kamala Harris. And then secondly, what have the Democrats been bleeding? The Democrats have been bleeding the black and brown vote, the gay vote, the young voters, if you will, suburban white women, and this anti-abortion issue, which is the sweet spot for Kamala Harris. She solves all of those issues for the Democratic Party. Those groups will form a coalition and coalesce around her, and then they can move forward. And there's plenty enough time to make up 2 percentage points or whatever the issue is. She's battle tested. She's been on the national platform for 3 or 4 years. And the other ones who would want to be president, like governors, have their supporters. But I'll be honest with you, they're not battle tested yet. And so she makes the most sense. And so we need to make smart decisions in times of crisis. This was a heroic and powerful decision made by Biden. And the Democrats got to continue to make smart decisions by getting behind Kamala Harris.
So, A. Scott, what are the potential consequences of an open or brokered convention for the Democrats?
Well, that puts us further behind the 8 ball, and we'll still be fighting with ourselves versus fighting the GOP and Donald Trump. This case that be made, the case prosecuted against Donald Trump, is an easy case. This race shouldn't even be close based on what Donald Trump represents, whether it's the chaos, corruption, or criminality of Donald Trump. And that's what we need to focus on. They are the political enemy. We're not the political enemy within ourselves. Now, in the next 2 to 4 days, if someone steps up, despite the endorsements that Kamala Harris has, and believes that they've got support within the party, then so be it. And she has to earn that nomination. And I think with the help of Biden and Clinton and others, including those who have not endorsed her yet, that being Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, and even Barack Obama. Barack Obama is not expected to endorse anybody because he doesn't want to tip the scale. I don't really understand that political philosophy, but that's his philosophy, at least historically. But you have put it to a vote, and it's up to the delegates. And I just think in the end, Kamala makes the most sense and really gives the GOP the most headaches, because Donald Trump can be very offensive to the women vote. He's not clear on his abortion issue. He wants to give it to the states, but he owns the abortion, the federal getting the federal ban struck down. He's going to have to deal with Kamala Harris very differently. The Republicans really wanted Biden to stay in, just like a year ago, the Democrats wanted Trump to stay in. Look at how the tables have turned in regard to political fortunes and stuff. But that fight, if it's going to be one, I hope we don't. But if it does, it'll be resolved at the convention. And then we got to get back to our core values and running against Donald Trump. That's all that matters in 2024. The rest of this is just noise and nonsense.
Scott, to your point, Kamala Harris is certainly battle-tested. This is not a simple process where you just throw somebody in there. There's a lot of opposition research. There's October surprises. There's all certain kinds of things. So what are the downsides of vetting a potential new candidate?
Well, the downside is it takes time. They have to not only be vetted, but there's a background check. They haven't been battle tested at the national level. And more importantly, how do they put together?
And A. Scott, we appreciate you joining us. And right now, reactions are still pouring in, including from former President Obama and former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Joining us now live from the White House is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Iris, what can you tell us about the reactions that we're seeing thus far?
Good evening to you, Steve. So right now reactions are pouring in, and this move is significant as this is the first time in modern U.S. history that a presumptive nominee of a major political party dropped out this late in the race. We know that over 5 decades ago, President Lyndon B. Johnson also dropped out, but he did it months earlier in the campaign than President Biden just did today. And now we're just a little over 100 days away from the November election and less than a month away from the Democratic National Convention when President Biden was supposed to be nominated. And this is shocking because also Biden's been saying for the past 25 days after the first debate that he's not going anywhere. And actually just earlier today, his campaign sent out an email calling on Democrats to unite around Biden. And now things have drastically changed. Now Vice President Kamala Harris has responded by saying, quote, she is honored to have the president's endorsement and her intention is to earn and win this nomination. That's her acknowledging that she will now have to fight to unite the Democratic Party. She's not automatically the nominee just yet. And meanwhile, some prominent Democrats are also speaking out, praising President Biden for the work he's done over the past 2 to 4 years, but also some are stopping short of endorsing Kamala Harris. Former President Barack Obama lengthy statement after Biden's announcement that he said, quote, our party will be able to create a process from which an outstanding nominee emerges. He did not mention Kamala Harris. And former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi also called Biden a, quote, patriotic American who has always put our countries first, also did not mention the current vice president. And that's the same case with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who also praised Biden for, quote, saving our country, and also several potential names to be on the Democratic ticket, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, also praising Biden while stopping short of endorsing Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, all of them are doing this in addition to the DNC chair, Jamie Harrison, who said the DNC is, quote, seeking a candidate who's able to defeat Trump, but also without mentioning the current vice president. But of course, there are those who are standing with President Biden and also aligned with him in endorsing the vice president. Those include 25 House Democrats and so far 14 Senate Democrats have done so, and they include prominent progressives like Senator Elizabeth Warren, Congressman Jamie Raskin, and Congresswoman Elaine Omar. And former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton are also throwing their support behind Kamala Harris. And meanwhile, we'll also have heard now that third-party candidate RFK Jr. is calling on Democrats to, quote, hold an open process to select a replacement for Biden. He wrote in a statement that, quote, instead of anointing a candidate handpicked by DNC elites, the party should use neutral polling to identify the candidate who can best beat Donald Trump, adding that, quote, if they had done this to begin with, I would not have to leave the Democratic Party. So a lot is still unfolding as we wait, of course, for President Biden to address the nation later next week. We don't know when exactly he will return to the White House just yet. We got a note from his doctor this morning saying his COVID symptoms have improved a lot. But so far, we have heard not very much about, who's coming next and how the process would unfold, especially given we're now so short, as there's such a short time right now for us before the DNC. Back to you.
NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao live from the White House will be checking back in with you shortly. Thank you, Iris. And coming up, we'll hear more from our guests about what's next for the presidential race and how Trump and other Republicans are responding. Plus, how are everyday Americans reacting to the news? Don't go away. We'll be right back. And this is truly an historic day. President Biden deciding not to seek re-election. And what are mainstream Americans actually saying about this, and how do they feel? NTD was out on the streets of New York City to find out what the folks have to say about the president's decision.
Biden just dropped out. What are your thoughts?
It was a great choice by him. I think that he didn't stand a chance against Trump.
I think it was a good decision for him to do that. It should have been done before.
I think everyone kind of knew this was coming, so it's not very surprising.
Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty chaotic, but I am here to support whoever the Democratic nominee is.
I hope that Kamala Harris now steps in and beats Trump.
I personally am not entirely sure that he would make it through the next 4 years if he were president.
Like, you can see that his health is declining, like, a lot, rapidly. So that's why I'm not surprised at all.
Myself, as an older person as well, you have to know when you're not as astute as you were when you're younger. You may have it here, but it's how you present yourself and how you're perceived by others that count.
So right now we're seeing Biden throwing his support behind Kamala Harris, and then we're also seeing a lot of the prominent Democrats doing the same. So among the crowded list of options here to replace him, who do you think is the best option?
I don't know. I have to see what those candidates have in play for the people.
I mean, I think that Kamala probably has the best firepower to win because it's much easier for them to at least release the funds to win an election to her. I mean, I can't imagine them wheeling out Bernie Sanders.
Well, ideally, it would be Kamala Harris because she is the vice president currently, and it's basically a job in training for the president.
She'll have all the money from the campaign to use for the election, and she's vice president. She's next in line, and I think she'll add some energy and some youth into the election.
Her life against crime in California puts her right where we want it to be. If it wouldn't be Harris this time, for me, I would go with the people from California.
Okay. So
Like
Gavin Newsom.
Gavin Newsom or Schiff.
I hope they go with someone a little moderate. I don't think they will, but I hope no, like Gavin Newsom or just somebody more in the middle would be great.
So let's say we're still in a Biden versus Trump scenario. Who would you pick?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I will have to go with Biden for the fear of Project 25, like Project 2025.
Biden, Democratic anyway. We want to save democracy.
Trump all the way. I want to see the economy do well. I want to see us get out of all these wars.
So I definitely would pick Trump over, and also Biden, because he hasn't been there.
It's not about whether it's Trump or whether it's Biden. It's about who's actually going to make sure that the people of this country is safe. Even the people outside this country. It's all about doing the right thing and making sure that we're spreading peace.
And to further analyze this historic moment with President Biden dropping out of the 2024 presidential race, we have two Democratic political strategists joining us to discuss. David Carlucci, former New York State Senator, and Dante Mills, a national trial attorney at Mills Edwards. Thank you both so much for joining. David, I want to get your thoughts. What have been the main reasons, do you think, that Biden may have stepped down? Was it due to, mental acuity, unfitness, or polling, or perhaps other reasons?
Yeah, I think it just came down to the fact that Joe Biden internalized and decided that the best move for the country would be to step aside. And because of, we've all seen his deteriorating health, and that he just couldn't articulate the needs that needed to be articulated. He's got a very strong record. The Biden-Harris administration has passed numerous pieces of legislation that have made a major difference in the lives of Americans. We've got the lowest unemployment rate we've had in decades. We've got the stock market rallying. We've got property values that are through the roof. People are doing well. We can always do better, but we need someone that's going to be able to articulate not just what you've done, but also what you're going to do. And Biden realized he just couldn't get the words out like he used to be able to, and decided after much pressure also as well to do what was best for the country. And that's what we've always expected of Joe Biden. And that's why I'm very honored to have supported him all of these years. And because I think what I've always hoped is that he would do what he thinks is best. And he's made that hard decision to step aside when he didn't have to, but he decided to do that on his own.
Dante, I want to go back to something that Iris said from her report from the White House. There's, it seems like already different factions, different points of view between Hillary and Bill Clinton endorsing Kamala, yet you have former President Barack Obama not throwing his support behind her just yet. How do you see the Democrats moving forward? Will there be a united Democrat Party, or will we see an open convention?
Steve, we just had this conversation, and we talked about President Biden and where he was. The truth of the matter is Father Time is undefeated, and I don't think this has anything to do with politics or policy. It's really just his ability to fulfill the rigors of the duty of being president of the United States, not for the next 6 months, which clearly he will stay in office, but for the next 4 years after that. And it was determined by President Biden and his team that just wasn't best for the country, and he wasn't able to do that. So how do we move forward as a Democratic Party? What you want to do is put forward the best person that you believe can beat Donald Trump. I don't know if anybody knows who that is right now. Polling has been done, and they've been polling for a while with different candidates. Remember, it's a handicap race because whoever steps up is only going to have 3 months before the election. That's not a lot of time to convince the American people that they should be behind you. And we're not talking about, say, the 25, 27% of Democratic voters that's going to vote for whoever the candidate is. We're talking about the other 13% in those independents that we need to convince to get off the couch. Who's going to motivate them? Who's going to excite them? I don't know if there's a big name out there. Really, when you're talking about Pete Buttigieg, you're talking about Shapiro, Whitmore, Westmore, who's been talked about as candidates. The country don't know who they are, right? So it's too short of a process to convince anybody who they are. So you look at Vice President Kamala Harris. Can everybody get behind her? Maybe, but she hasn't been touted as the heir apparent. And I think there's a reason for that, is because, there's not a big demographic that's going to be behind her. So, Steve, we talked about this before. I think Michelle Obama is somebody that has a name recognition that people can get behind pretty quickly, mobilize behind. She has the contacts and people in place. But I do think it's going to be some disagreement about who's the best person to move forward in this Democratic Party. But they're going to have to work quick. Work is going to have to be done quick to figure out who that is, because time is already ticking.
David, to Dante's point, the New York Times, people were picking up reporting that they had that President Biden was upset that Barack Obama may have been the puppet master, as they put it, behind the so-called coup and pushing out of President Biden. Now we see him not throwing his weight behind Kamala. Dante just floated Michelle Obama. Could we see her name start to emerge in the coming weeks?
Well, that's been a fantasy of Democrats for a long time, but Michelle Obama has said perfectly clear that she has no interest in that position. But I think what's going to happen is over the next 48, 72 hours, we're going to see a lot of different ideas, a lot of hypotheses of what could happen. But I think what will happen is the Democratic Party is going to rally behind Kamala Harris. And that's because Joe Biden has put a full-throated endorsement behind her. And yes, these delegates, we have over 4,000 delegates that are going to gather in Chicago. They were pledged to Joe Biden. About 3,900 of them were pledged to Joe Biden. But now that he has stepped aside, they can vote for whoever they'd like. So yes, I think you're going to see some people trying to make a move, throw some names out there. But what will quickly happen is that those real big names are then going to jockey for the vice president spot. And then the question is, what can they do? What can they deliver? And we talked about Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer. I think the polling that will be done over the next few weeks will really push to see, hey, could a VP candidate really move the ticket? Could they pick up a swing seat? Could Josh Shapiro actually deliver Pennsylvania? Could Whitmer actually deliver Michigan? That's what we're going to be looking to see. But the biggest thing that's out there is the fear of Donald Trump. And that's going to create a forced unity, whether you like it or not, behind Kamala Harris. And I think that's what's going to happen. After this convention, it'll be Kamala Harris, some VP candidate, we don't know who yet, but the Democratic Party will be lockstep in the effort to keep Donald Trump from the White House. And now we have an opportunity to maybe get some votes from that little chunk of undecided that's still left.
Dante, to your previous point, Kamala Harris does not appear or has not appeared to be the heir apparent. Is that perhaps due to her unpopularity? And with that said, when it comes to, say, the path of least resistance, does that supersede the way she is perceived by the voters? And when I say path of least resistance, I mean that you have this campaign infrastructure, you have the campaign funds. It's really a complex situation.
I think this election is too important to take the path of least resistance. We have to take the path that puts the country in the best position to be protected. And if the decision is made that that's Kamala Harris, then I guess there's no choice but to rally behind her. But I can tell you this, and being a political strategist, having a lot of conversations with people, you don't waste political opportunity. So if you have a vice president that's available, there is a reason if you're not using that vice president to speak. There's a reason that she has not been put out in front of the public more, because if she was capable of doing so in a meaningful way, they would have taken advantage of that. So you can't just assume that all of a sudden President Biden says he's not going to run again, and Kamala Harris is going to be able to impact so many voters and be able touched so many people and connected so many people because they would have done that before. So that's my concern here. We have a candidate that essentially was hidden as a vice president, and we can act like she wasn't, but she was. So her becoming the main person in the ticket, is that the best solution for this problem that the Democratic Party is facing? The other problem is there's not a lot of people that's going to want to put their name out because the way politics works, if they take this run now, they may not be able to run again in 4 years if they're on that cusp of being a presidential candidate. So there's some candidates that I've had some conversations with that are saying, listen, I'm handicapped here. There's only 3 months. I can't build my coalition. I don't want to waste my shot on this election cycle. So we'll see who's available, who's the best opportunity, who presents the best opportunity to win, and hopefully everybody can rally around whoever that ends up being.
David, I'll give you a moment to react.
Yeah, I don't think that Kamala Harris has been hidden. I think this is, if you look at any vice president, this is the role of vice president. It's a delicate balance between the executive and the VP. And Kamala Harris, when she has been out there, we've seen her more recently, she's done a good job. And I think it's a lot of unfair criticism that's been laid at her feet. And that's the historical criticism. I mean, you heard Donald Trump yesterday, making fun of her laugh. If we can't get more, superficial than that, I don't know what is. But it's things like that, the way she laughs, the way she talks. These things are really little, and I don't think will accumulate to much more than the people that have been down on Democrats since the beginning. So I think once the spotlight is on Kamala Harris, I think the best will come out and we'll be able to see her true colors. And I think we'll be impressed. And I think she will be able to defeat Donald Trump come November.
David, Dante, excellent insight from you both. We'll be coming back to this panel in just moments. But first, let's welcome another guest in studio here with us, Mr. Gerard Filitti. He's a political strategist and a civil rights attorney. Gerard, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get your thoughts just right off the top. What was your first reaction? Did you expect this?
Well, it was expected, I think, that Joe Biden would drop out. The timing was a little inauspicious on a Sunday after we've seen so much coverage on the Republican debate. But this also comes on the heels of 2 or 3 weeks that have been very good for Donald Trump. He's been driving the media headlines with the debate performance, with the assassination attempt, and then with an excellent convention. Now the attention is going to shift to the Democratic Party, and we're going to see Kamala Harris define herself as the preeminent candidate now that the party seems to be starting to unify behind her. So this is what the narrative is going to be for the next several weeks going into the Democratic convention. Now that Joe Biden is out, it will be all about Kamala Harris and how she gets the delegates to be the candidate.
What do you say to the point that a lot of Democrats are saying now that are satisfied with this result that former President Trump did not want to see Biden drop out of the race?
I think President Trump would have had a much easier time with Joe Biden, especially after the last 3 weeks. And that's the candidate he was preparing to fight against. I don't think he considered or was prepared, quite frankly, that Joe Biden would drop out so quickly. We saw that today in his statement. It was more addressing Joe Biden and Crooked Joe than addressing Kamala Harris or any other possible candidate. So the issue really is Donald Trump will have a tougher time because it's not the same opponent. He can argue against Biden's policies. He can argue that he will do a better job, but now he needs to know the person he is going to be challenging in November and come up with a new strategy of dealing with that.
And to your point, when it comes to strategy, a presidential campaign of this magnitude is planned out in great detail as to where you're going to allocate funds, what states you're going to attack. How does this change the kind of political landscape, if you will?
But to some extent, it changes the landscape by not knowing who the vice presidential candidate is going to be, or even confirming that Kamala Harris will be the Democratic candidate. The strategy is the same. You need to get out the vote, and you need to focus on the swing states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia to some extent, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada. These are all states that are in play and could cost or win the election. So it's never really in doubt that there would be tremendous resources put into those states. But now the question is, for example, J.D. Vance is a good candidate of his vice president that Donald Trump chose to address perhaps the voters in those states. What will Kamala Harris do? She needs someone to appeal to those voters as well. And so it really comes down to who the candidates will be. The states and the funding will be the same.
So back to the discussion that we just had with the two Democrat strategists there. How do you see this kind of playing out within the Democrats? Do you think Kamala will ultimately be their nominee, or is there something more to be said about the factions within the Democratic Party And are we likely to see other names emerge?
No, I don't think Joe Biden would have stepped down unless there was a clear path forward for Kamala Harris. And we note that she was his choice. He endorsed her. We already have endorsements from other Democrats, high-profile Democrats as well. The last thing the Democrats want is an open convention. They want certainty. They want to unite as quickly as possible. And the other part is Kamala Harris is half of the Biden-Harris ticket. So she is running essentially on the accomplishments of Joe Biden. To have someone else, they would be open to scrutiny and they would have to establish themselves perhaps at a point where they couldn't. And with Harris, she can go with the achievements that Joe Biden had. And that would be enough perhaps to propel her among voters to the front of the line.
Now, obviously, we have heard much from different strategists that by circumventing Kamala Harris because of her race and her gender could cause problems for the Democrats. How does the dynamic of now a black woman, Kamala Harris, Trump going against her as opposed to, say, the two old white men that were in the race?
Well, now Donald Trump is officially the oldest person running for president. That's a change. And the dynamic is really different because he has to be more guarded in the language he uses. He can't be as aggressive or as on the attack personally as he was against Joe Biden. With Kamala Harris, he needs to go after her record. He needs to go after her policy and ideas. It can't be just about barbs about her laugh or her personality. And that's something that Trump has a hard time doing sometimes. So the dynamic changed. With Joe Biden, he had this strategy, this new strategy, where he was largely ignoring him. You saw him not looking at him during the debate. You saw references to Biden very infrequently during the convention. Now, with Kamala Harris, he has to address her because she's the new kid on the block, literally.
And to your point, she doesn't really have much of a record. As vice president, you don't really do much, although she was the border czar, which I'm assuming that we'll start to see some campaign ads talking about what she did or didn't do at the border.
Well, we absolutely will. And now we have to focus on what the next presidential debate will be with Kamala Harris, because Trump, if it was Biden, there's no point in having that second debate. But with Harris as the border czar effectively and Donald Trump making immigration a top priority and building the wall, we will see them clash on this issue repeatedly. So with Kamala Harris, we have her policies in California, but also she is running on Joe Biden. She's running on everything he's done in the last 4 years.
Gerard Filitti will be back in studio with you. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be welcoming you back to the show in just a little bit. Now let's bring back in David Carlucci, former New York State Senator, and Dante Mills, National Trial Attorney at Mills Edwards. It's great to have you both back, guys. Dante, what are your thoughts on the current state of the Democratic Party in light of these events?
I think it's led by someone who showed today that he is willing to put America first. It takes a lot of courage to say, I don't believe that I'm the best person moving forward for whatever reason that is. And clearly, I believe that this is health related, not anything, something more just cognitive. Like I said, Father Time is undefeated. But for him to be willing to kind of hand over power and not seek it again is a stark contrast to what you see on the Republican side right now, which is a grab for power and as much power as possible. So I think that shows a lot for the Democratic Party. I think it's definitely unprecedented. And I'm not going to sit here and suggest that this isn't a little bit chaotic. And there's no way to plan for something like this because we just don't know how to operate coming out of it. We also know that moving forward, we can't assume that there's going to be another presidential debate. And I know you were just speaking about that, but we can't assume those things because if I was Donald Trump, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't give whoever the candidate is the opportunity to convince the American people that they're the right person for the job. You're going to say that they're not if you're on the Republican side. And I think any opportunity where all eyes are on whoever the new candidate is a chance for them to expand their reach. So we have to make sure that whoever takes that position already has a relationship with the public. And that's going to be important because it's all about getting people off the couch to go vote and not those hard Democratic folks. We're talking about the independents and the people who normally are willing to stay home if it's raining or if it's cold outside. Are they motivated and excited enough to get off the couch? And that's what the Democratic Party is going to have to focus on in this upcoming election.
David, Dante brings up a fascinating point as to whether or not former President Trump will debate the next or new nominee. And with that said, how do you think Kamala Harris's, political strategy might differ? Say, if you were to advise her, what would you say to do differently than what President Biden was doing.
Yeah, no, I agree with Dante. I think Donald Trump's going to run from a debate. He's going to come up with all types of excuses. I think Kamala Harris should double down and challenge Donald Trump to multiple debates because I think we've seen that she has the energy and the charisma when she's given the opportunity to really perform. And that's what Democrats have been craving. They've been craving for someone to deliver that message right up to Donald Trump in an articulate way. The frustrations that we have felt, the grievances we've had against the Republican Party for putting up a candidate like Donald Trump, and with the messaging that they've had, has really been offensive to many of us. And unfortunately, even with Biden's stellar record, he hasn't been able to articulate that message in an effective way. And I'm not saying that you need to be a bully like Donald Trump or call people names as Donald Trump is doing, but you need to articulate that message. And that's why the Bidenomics, that failed, because not that the economic policy has failed, it's actually done quite well. But it fails when you try to boast about a policy that you're saying you've done so well for someone. That's not something that works. What's worked for Donald Trump is pointing out the problems. And that's all the RNC did this past week. They didn't really talk about anything they're going to do. All they did was point out the problems. And we can all do that, maybe not as well as Donald Trump, but that's something that the Democratic Party has done and needs to do in these coming months, is really deliver that message. Not just, oh, it's so bad, elect us and only us will fix it. No, this is why, and this is how we're going to fix it. Not just platforms like, we're going to reduce inflation. That's it. I mean, that's in the RNC platform. It's really a joke. And I think that we can get away from this who's too old, who's a criminal. When we really talk about the policy, I think Democrats will win hands down every time. And I'm excited to see someone with that energy take up this platform.
And Dante, we're going to give you a chance to respond, but we are getting reports that former President Trump has said that he will debate or wants to debate Kamala Harris, with one caveat, moving it from ABC to Fox News.
Why not NTD?
Well, if Trump will be in the driver's seat, right? Because whoever the nominee is, they're going to want that exposure. They're going to want to have the opportunity to debate Trump. So they're going to have to abide by whatever rules he's stating. So I think any rules that he gives, they're going to have to say yes so they can get that debate locked in. But we're political strategists, right, Steve? You're in the news all the time. You follow politics closely. The average American does not. So trying to explain to them what a new person's political standing is, what their platform is in 3 months is going to be extremely difficult. And that's the problem that the Democrats are facing right now, finding someone, and if that's Harris, people don't know what she stands for. They know she was the vice president. A lot of people do, but they don't know what she stands for. So trying to get that message out about what her policy is going to be to excite people is going to be the risk. So whatever they can do to get Donald Trump on a debate stage so that millions of people are watching and can then tell their friends, here's why I'm voting for Kamala Harris or whoever the candidate is, they should absolutely do it.
Dante Mills, David Carlucci, thank you both so much for your time.
Great.
And let's bring back in Gerard Filitti, political strategist and civil rights attorney. Gerard, great to have you back in.
So, and I don't really know,
first of all, what do you make of some of the discussion we were just listening to now, and also the prospect of a Trump-Harris debate?
Well, I think a Trump-Harris debate is inevitable. I think that Donald Trump has a lot to lose if he doesn't debate her. It's no longer a matter of being in a position where he's contested by Joe Biden, but now he looks bad to independents who want to know what these candidates think. This is a wake-up call to independents that now they can pay attention to the race. It's not just about two old white men, but you have a new dynamic. So this is important for Trump as well. He needs to get his messaging out there. And quite frankly, it'll be difficult for him to do that between now and after the Democratic convention. The next month, it's all about the Democratic Party. So Trump needs to be on camera after that. He needs to have the debate. He needs to have the interaction. And he needs to set forth his message. And to Dante's point, it really has gotten simpler in this country. We have party platforms. And this is, again, speaking to why Kamala is likely the candidate. because Biden-Harris is Harris now. You have the same policy and the same agenda. The party platform is being voted on, has been written. It's not going to change. Joe Biden's policies, you don't want to change them mid-election. So you need someone who is part of that, who understands that, and is not going to come in with a new agenda. Anyone else you bring in, you have to ask where they stand on things. Kamala Harris, you just assume that she does what Joe Biden did. She can define herself a little bit differently, but it has that steady continuity that Americans are used to or want.
And to your point, when it comes to Kamala Harris's record, not being in the spotlight as vice president, there wasn't much to go off of. But as you said, there is that platform. What do you think the Trump campaign is going to be focusing on, maybe dating back to her time in the Senate?
Well, I think they're going to focus on the border first and foremost. That's the biggest issue. And I think Trump will hammer home that she was in charge of securing the border and dealing with the crisis, and it's gotten worse. I think we can expect him to go after her for a progressive voting record. I think we can also expect him to go after her record as Attorney General in California, and he will find any opportunity to say that she actually has been soft on crime, that she's not done enough, that her economic agenda is high tax and more unemployment, and it will only drive inflation. It'll be those three things, really, the progressive agenda, the border, and the economy.
And how do you think GOP donors and supporters are reacting to the news of Biden stepping down?
Well, I don't think that was unexpected for them. I think that they will continue donating as they had to the GOP and to Trump and the top ticket candidates. I think that this really just affects the majority of the Democratic Party, and a lot of independents who are now paying more attention to this race than they were a week ago.
Why do you think we saw a full-throated endorsement by Bill and Hillary, yet not so much from, say, former President Barack Obama?
Well, with Barack Obama, there's also the dynamic that in 2016, he chose to endorse Hillary Clinton and not his own vice president. And that stung Biden. That's been an issue between him and the Obamas that's been talked about often. And now we're seeing that play out again. Joe Biden is going to support Kamala Harris because she was his pick. That was the right thing for him to do. The Clintons as well, they want to see that continuity of agenda, of policy, to not rock the boat. Obama, I think he will end up supporting Kamala Harris, whether it's tomorrow or at the end of the week. That's not surprising that the party wants to play out a little bit of who will the candidate be, keep the drama going, while behind the scenes they're working to secure all the delegates that are needed to make sure she's the nominee.
And I mean, we've heard the idea that the Republicans, the GOP, did not want to face somebody else other than Joe Biden. Now that it appears to be Kamala, do you think that she's their first choice now, as opposed to some of the other potential folks in the pool?
I think she is their first choice because she's a known entity. And I think that they have a lot of criticism that they have in mind already, especially with the border. That's Trump's biggest issue, and she was the border czar. I keep hammering that home because I know the Republicans will. I think they prefer having her as a candidate than anyone else. Quite simply, they've already done opposition research on her. She ran for president in the last election and on the primary, in the Democratic primary. She is known. She has her weaknesses and her strengths, and the Republicans, Trump especially, want someone who is predictable.
Gerard, not to get into the weeds too much, but there are some technicalities and legalities when it comes to the next nominee for the Democrats. Do they face potential legal challenges if they were to use their delegates, if the delegates were to, nominate the next presidential nominee?
Not if they use the delegates, because it's the party that chooses the candidate ultimately, not the voters, ironically. So if the delegates vote appropriately and they follow party rules, then whoever they choose as the nominee is not subject to legal scrutiny. You may have legal challenges on whether someone else can be on the ballot because states have different filing deadlines. You may have that in a state or two. But realistically, I don't think we will come to a November election where a candidate is not on a ballot.
Fascinating stuff. Gerard Filitti, thank you so much. Now let's go back to NTD's Iris Tao, who's our White House correspondent at the White House as we speak. Iris, how are Republicans now responding to this news?
So former President Trump, in his immediate response after the news of Biden dropping out, again criticized President Biden for his border energy policies, accusing him of doing damage to the country. In subsequent statements after the news, Trump now is actually saying that now we have to start all over again because they are forced to spend time and money on fighting Joe Biden. So Trump is now saying, quote, shouldn't the Republican Party be reimbursed now that given Biden has dropped out? Also, he's saying how the The next debate, which was scheduled in September, hosted by ABC, should now be changed to postpone or reschedule, but also actually change the host from ABC to Fox News, and that's Trump's latest statements after the news broke out. And meanwhile, we remember that actually last week during the Republican National Convention, Trump notably only mentioned Biden's name once in his whole speech, and that was even unscripted as we looked on the teleprompter. And so right now, he's again, of course, shifting its focus to potentially another Democratic nominee. We also remember that during last week's convention, Trump's campaign responded to Vice President Kamala Harris' challenge for a VP debate by saying that they're not going to accept a debate challenge with Kamala Harris until after the DNC. And back then, the statement from the Trump campaign read, quote, "We don't know who the Democrat nominee for vice president is going to be, so we can't lock in a date before the DNC," adding that, quote, "To do so would be unfair to Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker, Gretchen Whitmer, or whoever Kamala Harris picks as her running mate." And that's actually from last week during the RNC when, of course, before President Biden announced his dropping out of the race today. And we're now also hearing responses from Republicans, including Trump's new VP pick, Senator J.D. Vance. Senator J.D. Vance is tying Harris to President Biden's policy agenda when it comes to border and energy, indicating that she will bring pretty much of the same agenda as Biden, even if she wins the Democratic nomination. He added that, quote, "President Trump and I are ready to save America. Whoever's at the top of the Democrat ticket, bring it on." Also, we know that before Biden's announcement on Sunday, Vance actually argued that the president should resign if he steps aside in the 2024 race. And of course, reactions are also pouring in from Republican lawmakers, and that includes House Speaker Mike Johnson, who actually called on Biden to resign, saying Democrats and prospects are no better with Harris. He also actually, before Biden's announcement this afternoon, warned that the GOP could file legal challenges if Democrats try to replace Biden, saying, quote, "I think they have got legal hurdles in some of these states and it'll be litigated." And of course, we're also hearing from actually international leaders as this whole event unfolds. We have Israel's president Herzog thanking President Biden for his, quote, "friendship and steadfast support for the Israeli people," adding that he's a true ally of the Jewish people. We know that Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, is set to meet with President Biden next Tuesday in a visit to the U.S. Of course, we're waiting for more updates to that meeting. And we also have response from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau saying how Biden is a, quote, "great man and everything he does is guided by his love for this country." UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak responded by saying how working with Joe Biden, he saw firsthand his love for America and dedication to service. And of course, right now, where the White House is saying how President Biden has, quote, "spoken to a number of members of Congress, governors, and supporters, and will continue to engage with key stakeholders tonight and tomorrow." So a lot to watch for both tonight and tomorrow, as of course, all the reporters will return to the White House. We expect briefings from the White House during a daily schedule. Also have Secretary of State Blinken saying how Biden has, quote, "restored U.S. leadership around the world," and even Biden's son, Hunter Biden, praising his father's life of service and saying how he's gotten unconditional love from his father. And I have actually talked to a lot of Biden supporters at different President Biden's rallies after the debate about this particular issue of calls for Biden to drop out. And some of them told me it would be dangerous if Democrats try to replace Biden with someone else, as they know Biden well enough but aren't necessarily familiar with another candidate who's not Biden. Some of them told me it's not reasonable to change horse in midstream. And some of them actually also told me they don't really care who's on the top of the Democratic ticket as long as they can defeat Donald Trump. So different voices right now within the Democratic Party as we wait for more news regarding what's coming next. Back to you.
NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao, thank you for that update, Iris. And here with me back in studio is Dan McMillan, the founder and executive director at Save Democracy in America. Dan, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, Dan. So how will President Biden stepping down impact the campaign finances of the Democratic Party?
Not really in a significant way. I mean, there's a lot made of the fact that if Harris becomes the top of the ticket, then she directly takes the cash that's on hand in the campaign funds. But the fact is, it's really a non-issue, because if they nominate another candidate other than Harris, that money can immediately be transferred to the DNC or to a super PAC allied with the party. the money will not go to waste. And on the other hand, I think it's true that whoever the candidate is, the Democratic donor class is very eager to defeat Donald Trump, and plenty of money is going to flow in. So I don't think that's a consideration.
Is it fair to say that although it may not cause an obstacle on the surface, that candidate would have to have President Biden's blessing? Does he have the ultimate say over where that money will go?
No, not really. I don't see that he does. If he's stepped aside as the nominee, I mean, I'm sure that people would listen to him. But the reality is that money cannot be transferred directly to another candidate. It would have to go to the DNC or to party super PACs, which would then spend that money on behalf of the presidential candidate, and if need be, on behalf of down ballot candidates. There's no reason for Biden to have to be involved in that.
So how might the financial strategy of the Democratic Party change now with a new candidate?
Well, they may shift a little bit more to outside spending, since if Harris is not the nominee, that money going to the super PACs. But I think that they may find that they really can juice their small dollar fundraising, because I feel very strongly that the party should follow an open process that a number of prominent Democrats have suggested. That is to say that let Vice President Harris, but whatever other Governor Whitmer, Newsom, Beshear, and so on, to sort of go. They could go on media interviews or in person. They can make their case directly to the American people, and come 4 weeks from now, the Democratic convention polls would give some idea as to which candidate generated the most enthusiasm among Democratic voters. And in that sense, I wouldn't be surprised if they got a lot more small dollar money from their people, because there's been a huge enthusiasm gap through this whole campaign between Trump and Biden. And I think one reason for that is that through this process, the Democrats have to some degree ignored the wishes of their own voters. Because going back 2 years and more, in poll after poll, 2/3 of Democratic voters said, we don't want Biden to run again. And whether it was by mutual arrangement or by inertia, who knows, effectively what Democratic voters got was an uncontested primary, a Biden-Harris coronation. And if I were a Democratic voter, I'm of no party, I would be rather annoyed by that. And in fact, a lot of Democratic voters were annoyed by it. Suddenly, in this way, even though the voters would not directly participate in choosing the nominee, by expressing their opinion in polls, their voice would finally be heard in the process. And I think that would be fantastic. You know, everyone in the party is seeing this as this terrible crisis and catastrophe, and oh, woe is me, what are we going to do? This is a marvelous opportunity. We've never seen in history. This is the first, I don't think this is the first time in history where a party that was going into the general clearly behind, losing, suddenly has a chance to completely reset the campaign. I would also say, I have no opinion as to which is the best candidate, but if the nominee is not Harris, then that candidate cannot be blamed for inflation, the crisis at the border, Afghanistan. You've got a fresh start. Suddenly all the Republican attack lines are irrelevant. And I would also observe with regard to Harris, Republicans and other people are already saying that they will accuse Harris of being complicit in a cover-up of President Biden's frailty and cognitive decline. And in view of the reporting I've seen in New York Times, Wall Street Journal, there seems to be a lot of evidence of many people in the Democratic Party, in the White House, and in the campaign, noticing a steep decline on the part of the president in the last few months. Harris, being so close to the president as his number two, would suffer that accusation, whereas a governor like Newsom or Whitmer or Beshear or Westmoreland, Maryland, they don't have that problem. So,
and to your point, former President Barack Obama's statement doesn't necessarily endorse Kamala and opens the idea of having multiple people at an open convention in just a few weeks at the DNC's convention. How do you see that whole situation playing out? Who's the ultimate decider? What needs to happen to secure Kamala before that, or not?
Well, I mean, they could secure Kamala before that. I mean, if the people at the top, you know, the people who are influential kind of agree among themselves that they want a Harris coronation, I doubt very much that any of these other possible candidates like Whitmer or Bashir would risk the wrath of the party by actually challenging Harris. So what would have to happen for this process is for the party, for the DNC, to say, and there is obviously support near the top of the party for this. You know, Obama, by implication, Nancy Pelosi, and many others, that they got to say, okay, we're going to have an open audition. The delegates are released to vote their conscience between now and then. The DNC, we're going to be the gatekeepers. We're going to not let we're not going to let Robert Kennedy with his worm-eaten brain jump in, right? But any serious Democratic candidate, a governor or a senator, will allow them to come in. And then I say, you know, instead of hiding from the media, which frankly I think Harris has done from unscripted contact, let him get out there and take unscripted interviews, take hostile interviews, show what they can do. And we could have a real campaign of ideas. The media, all eyes, the eyes of the nation would be on this process. It would suck all the oxygen out of the room for Trump and his campaign. I think it would generate tremendous excitement, and I think the party could go into the home stretch with a fresh face and some real democratic legitimacy for its candidate. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the party and for the country.
A big part of any political campaign is the infrastructure and how that campaign is run. Yeah. And so, you know, former President Trump came under fire for having a very weak infrastructure in his first and back in 2015. He's getting a lot of praise right now for the way that it's set up. Now that, you know, you have Kamala there, President Biden's infrastructure is in place. How big of a challenge is it to kind of reset everything this far out?
Well, you certainly couldn't reset it, but it seems to me that whoever becomes the nominee would simply use all of the Biden-Harris campaign staff, apparatus, and so on. The apparatus would stay the same. It continue to do a lot of what it's doing now while the nominee is being chosen. I don't really see that has to be a problem.
Dan McMillan, we're going to take a short break. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Do you ever wake up and realize your life has no purpose?
Do I have a death wish? Morgan asked. Maybe I did. I thought this would be our final run ever. We had made millions and millions of dollars, but God had other plans.
Peter Lowe, the one-time drug dealer turned pastor, along with 2 others, will be executed at 12 midnight local time.
The next day, something strange happened. Someone came up to me and gave me this flyer about Jesus.
You can be in heaven, or you can be in hell. The choice is yours.
We'll walk straight out of here. Pretend to be the media.
This pathetic maggot got caught trying to escape my prison. Nobody escapes my prison.
He's a changed person. He's a new man.
I found Christ in here, and he forgave me.
I found Christ too.
My name is Peter Lowe, and I will be executed in 2 hours. Why am I being executed, you ask?
Jesus is for free, and salvation is a gift. Do you believe in Jesus?
We are only 80 years removed from countries that killed 60 to 70 million people intentionally.
And we have people being like, oh, it can't happen here. Yeah, it can, and it might.
These people, they're not interested in the facts. They're not interested in anything except crushing people that are in their way.
There needs to be a formal deprogramming of the cult members.
A strong church can stop this.
And welcome back to our special breaking coverage of the 2024 presidential election. But first, an update on the bipartisan Senate investigation into the attempted assassination of former President Trump. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin saying Secret Service did not attend a security briefing with local SWAT and snipers on the morning of that shooting. The report says there were less than 40 local SWAT team members and snipers assigned to last weekend's Trump rally. Local law enforcement reportedly shown a security perimeter, and it did not include the American Glass Research Building. That's the building where the shooter was found. The report says local communications were isolated and not shared with the Secret Service. It adds law enforcement reported the suspect to command before the shooting and got a reply back. According to the findings, Secret Service was not going to send snipers to the rally at first. The subcommittee says the Justice Department, DHS, and FBI still haven't provided information requested or confirmed that they will preserve those records. Senator Johnson is calling for transparency. He says Congress and the public deserve a full explanation and complete answers about what went wrong with that day. And with us, we have again Gerard Filitti. He's a political strategist and civil rights attorney. Gerard, thank you so much for joining. There's still a lot of unanswered questions, and now it appears there's a lot of contradictions, raising even more questions. How are you viewing this investigation thus far?
Well, this investigation has already shown us a timeline that is suspect in the sense that the Secret Service should have done more to protect Donald Trump. There are inconsistencies. There are issues with not just with the perimeter, but the capability of the Secret Service, quite frankly, to communicate and work with local law enforcement. And this is very troubling because Donald Trump, as a former president who was under a known threat, a credible threat from Iran, was attending a rally where he was less than protected. So this investigation will play out. It will not be a quick investigation, but it will be a thorough one. And there may need to be systemic changes at the Secret Service because of this.
And to your point, one of the first things that I think we heard from the director was that there was nobody perched atop the location where the shooter was found, where he shot from, because of the slope. And I think clearly looking at the slope, it didn't seem to be something that would stop a former Navy SEAL or likely, a Secret Service agent.
Well, it's not a credible statement when you consider that the counter sniper teams were also on sloped roofs. And if you don't have someone on the roof, you secure access, meaning you have a police officer standing at entry points to make sure no one goes into the building. So there are a lot of things that could have been done even if you didn't have a sniper on the roof of that building, and they were simply not done. And the biggest problem, I think, is that it does look that there was at least a minute to 2 minutes of knowledge that there was someone on the roof or in the vicinity of the roof who might take a shot at Donald Trump, and you don't see Secret Service on stage, you don't see them getting him off, you see the speech continuing. And why that happened is what really needs to be answered.
And to the question of transparency, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley was actually there I believe it was yesterday, trying to, lay eyes on the site, and he was, according to him, shut down by FBI agents and told to leave. What do you make of a United States Senator not being able to get answers?
Well, I think that's a little bit, senators should have the answers that they need. They usually do get cooperation from the FBI and other law enforcement. Granted, this is an ongoing and active investigation, but in general, in the past, they have received information and briefings and have been allowed to visit scenes that were no longer considered an active crime scene. So it is a little bit surprising that he was denied access.
Now, Gerard, prior to getting prepared for this special coverage, this unprecedented day, historic day, with President Biden stepping down from his campaign to seek re-election, I was thinking about the news cycle. So much has happened in just one short week, from the attempted assassination. There's also something buried in the mix, which is former President Trump's documents case, classified documents case in Florida, being thrown out. Talk to us about this from a legal standpoint. point.
That's a huge deal and a very big victory for Donald Trump. His argument had been that essentially Merrick Garland had no legal authority to appoint Jack Smith as special counsel because that's not a constitutionally provided position and there's no law that allows him to do that. Judge Cannon agreed with that argument, perhaps after Justice Thomas wrote a concurring opinion that was really not necessary in a previous case that gave her guidelines on that this was something the Supreme Court might well consider. This opinion really terminates the case completely in Florida. Obviously, it is being appealed to the 11th Circuit. There is reason to believe that the Supreme Court will almost inevitably hear this case, but this is a slow process, and it will be at least next year before anything is refiled, if at all.
And so political, in any political campaign, the momentum, it ebbs and flows. Right now, you had former President Trump coming into the convention with a lot of momentum. Today with this, although it seems like it may be sort of a stain for the Democrats, do you see this sort of reinvigorating the Democratic side?
Without a doubt, this is reinvigorating the Democratic side. Donald Trump had a couple of weeks of significant momentum. The news cycles were on him. People were convinced that now he was unstoppable or unbeatable unless something happened. And that something happened today. Joe Biden dropped out. Kamala Harris looks poised to be the next candidate for the Democratic Party, and that redefines the race. All of a sudden, we need to know who these people are, who's running, what are their positions, how do they compare, what are their debates going to be like, what are their policies going to be like, will this be an open convention or a brokered one, will she be appointed or anointed? All these questions are reinvigorating interest from Democrats, for independents, Republicans, the whole country.
And back to former President Trump's legal challenges, do you see the tossing out of the documents case kind of being the impotence for other dominoes to fall in some of these other cases? Is that a possibility?
It's very much possible. I think we see the same motion being filed in Washington, D.C., where Jack Smith is prosecuting. I don't think that judge will grant the motion, but again, that will be appealed. That will reach the Supreme Court. These cases will be on hold until then. In Georgia, that case, it's at the appellate division on whether Fani Willis could continue to prosecute. We won't know until March at the earliest. In New York City, that's the one that's on the agenda. We have sentencing potentially in September, but people have kind of dismissed that case by now. So Donald Trump is, for now, in the clear legally.
So Jack Smith, just to be clear, he did appeal the dismissal of that case,
He did.
which will ultimately, you say, kick it to the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it'll end up in the Supreme Court. He appealed to the 11th Circuit. They will hear it at some point later this year, and well, almost definitely hear it. And then I think that you will have it before the U.S. Supreme Court. I don't think the 11th Circuit necessarily will uphold Judge Cannon, and even if it does, it'll still be appealed. So it'll be next year before this gets to the Supreme Court.
So timetable putting us beyond Inauguration Day.
Correct.
Okay. Gerard Filitti, thank you so much. And the 46th president has been a lifelong public servant. His term as president of the United States has continued to build on his lifelong goals to make a better, stronger, and safer America. Here's a look back over the past few years of his presidency.
President Joe Biden, a Democrat, has served this country for more than 50 years. First as a member of the U.S. Senate for 36 years, vice president for 8, and as president since 2021. Amid the global COVID-19 pandemic, Biden secured the office against incumbent opponent Donald Trump, with 306 votes in the Electoral College and a 4-point margin in the popular vote. With the first black female vice president, Kamala Harris, by his side, Biden has been successful in completing a number of his goals. On his first day in office, President Biden rejoined the Paris Climate Accords. Just 6 weeks into his presidency, Biden signed the American Rescue Plan to jumpstart the economy and change the course of the pandemic. He took swift action to get America vaccinated and create more jobs. Early in his presidency, in August 2021, Biden also oversaw the American withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan. The State Department later pointed to planning failures that caused chaos and violence. Some of Biden's most memorable policy accomplishments include the bipartisan infrastructure law and the climate-focused Inflation Reduction Act. In November 2021, his infrastructure law approved investments in the nation's infrastructure and competitiveness. It aimed to make long overdue improvements across the nation, such as rebuilding roads and bridges, delivering clean drinking water, and expanding high-speed internet access. After the Senate voted 69-30 in favor of the measure, Biden told reporters, "We're on the cusp of an infrastructure decade that I truly believe will transform America." At the time, then House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy criticized the measure out of concern that it was tied to a broader $3.5 trillion spending package. McCarthy told NPR in September 2021 that by passing the bill, you get a bigger social government, you get harm to our economy. In August 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act became the largest ever investment in climate action, creating a surge of energy projects. The legislation will spend roughly $374 billion on decarbonization and climate resilience over a 10-year span. Through this historic investment, the Biden administration set its sights to lowering costs to American families by reducing their energy bills and health care costs. Not a single Republican in the House or the Senate voted in favor of it. The act is often criticized for having nothing to do with inflation. University of Penn Wharton scholars estimated that government spending would increase in order to pay for the legislation's climate-related provisions. Biden's presidency has seen the start of two major wars abroad and record illegal immigration in the U.S. Biden's presidency has seen the start of two major wars abroad and record illegal immigration in the U.S. Since the start of Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, President Biden has rallied the world to stand with Ukraine. Many have supported the efforts, but some Republicans urge for more attention on U.S. immigration and asylum reforms, calling for tougher border security at the U.S.-Mexico border. Illegal immigration surged to unprecedented highs after the Biden administration reversed certain border policies. Critics warned about human and drug trafficking as the U.S. migration system can't keep up. In recent weeks, Biden initiated executive action to curtail border crossings, resulting in a noticeable decline. Individuals who can't immediately prove their lives are in danger are quickly deported. Biden also oversaw the U.S. response to the Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel on October 7, 2023, and the beginning of Israel's war on Hamas. His administration has tried to walk a fine line between supporting America's longtime ally Israel and calling for humanitarian aid for Gazan civilians. The U.S. has both supplied weapons to Israel and operated a temporary pier bringing aid to Gaza. The White House says Biden has also helped to expand NATO to be larger and stronger and increased America's influence in the Indo-Pacific.
And joining us now to discuss President Biden's legacy and the historic nature of this day where President Biden has decided not to seek re-election, we have presidential historian Jane Hampton-Cook. Jane, so great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Jane, tell us, what were your initial thoughts when you saw this news today, President Biden's statement, and just how unprecedented is this?
Well, I really initially thought about Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was president in 1968. He announced to the American people that he was not going to run for re-election, and that was in March of that year. And then within days, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and within 2 months, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And so it was a very tumultuous time. And I look at what we've seen here as sort of a smash up between LBJ's decision to withdraw and not continue his race, and Woodrow Wilson, who was another Democratic president, but he had a stroke 17 months before the end of his term, and his wife and doctor hid it from the American people and the media and even from the cabinet. And so we've seen kind of a mixture of health reasons like Wilson, but then also political realities like Lyndon Johnson.
And Lyndon Johnson's successor was Richard Nixon. Some people drawing contrasts to Nixon's when discussing President Biden's potential legacy. When you think of somebody like Richard Nixon, no matter how great or how many accomplishments he may have had, you simply your mind oftentimes just goes to Watergate. What do you think President Biden's legacy will be?
Well, I think it's certainly a number of the things in the piece that you just ran. But, I think inflation, especially if inflation seems to be a deciding issue in this election, a lot of the government spending that Biden did has led to this inflation, is what a lot of economists argue. I think he'll be remembered, too, for the vaccine mandate. It wasn't just encouraging vaccines, it was mandating it. And that crossed the line for a number of Americans and their civil liberties. He got rid of the Keystone Pipeline on the first day in office, and that killed a number of great jobs for the Midwest and in Arkansas and places like that. And so the policies that Biden has, pushed forward are the things that are going to still be part of the legacy that Kamala Harris, if she's the new nominee, has to defend. And so the whole policy package, is something that's going to still be relevant in this election, even with him not at the top of the ticket.
And do you think the nature of his exit, the way that it kind of came down in terms of all the pressure and then him having COVID and just all of the factors will kind of overshadow his legacy?
I think that debate may very well overshadow it, because I don't think we have ever seen a more a debate that has had more impact than the debate between Donald Trump and Biden at the end of June. I've never seen a debate ultimately lead to a candidate withdrawing from the race in the presidency. You've just not seen that before. So this has been a really decisive month. In the past, 4 weeks, we've seen tremendous change on both sides of, with both political parties. And so it's definitely, it could overshadow his legacy for sure.
And you mentioned when we were talking about his legacy just a moment ago, the vaccine mandates. It's really hard to, the vaccine mandates and the mask mandates, that seems like so many lifetimes ago. It doesn't really feel that it was still within this 4-year term of him being president. With that said, thinking back to January 6th, 2021, a lot of people said Trump is done. How do you put that into context?
Well, I think the fact that we've seen a cognitive decline with Joe Biden, I think that will be talked about a lot, because when Woodrow Wilson was ill in 1919, we didn't have instant news. We didn't have television yet. And they were able to hide his illness. And I think a lot more may come out about just his really the status of his health and what was done to try to conceal that as best as they could from the public. And we've seen a deterioration. And I think that really, in this day and age, really opens up a question: what do you do when a president's health declines? When is the right place to withdraw, either from the next election? And, Republicans right now are suggesting that he resign from the presidency. And that would probably actually help Kamala Harris if he did that. But if his health is too weak to run, is it too weak to remain in office as president? And I think that's a valid question that historians will be debating, I think, in the future.
And I think it's often hard when we live in the present. There's obviously emotion, human emotion attached to the way that we look at things. So if we could just kind of look at this in the broader context of U.S. presidential history, how do you think that Joe Biden's presidency will fit in?
I think he'll be looked at as the career politician, and that what that came to mean in the past century. Because, initially the founders intended for someone to serve as, a governor, a congressman, a member of the Senate and president, and then go back, to their civilian life. And this is really the culmination of 50 years of service, which is laudable in many ways, but also just raises questions. Do we really want career politicians? Or, as the Republicans have seemed to indicate, maybe we do want someone outside the system. And I think that debate is going to also shape the way people look at President Biden's legacy.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, I think, on both sides where you have, the issue of term limits, and when you have career politicians whose net worth tends to multiply in such a way that most public servants don't see, it certainly raises questions for sure. With that said, what lessons can future political leaders, in your opinion, learn from President Biden's decision to step down?
I think that they can, look at President Biden's decision and think of it as laudable, that he did what was really in the best interest of his party, that he didn't let it get to the point where Speaker Pelosi, former President Obama, that they were not publicly calling for him to leave. They were hinting at it, but they weren't tearing him down in the process, at least not in public. And I think he showed that he accepted reality and decided to make this difficult decision, which, he had wanted to be president for his whole career, and to finally get here and then to not really be able to, for health reasons, seek that second term was very difficult. But I think it will be looked upon favorably. Maybe maybe it should have been done, a few months earlier. But I think that, he had historians surrounding him in the first days of his presidency, advising him, and so that will probably be to his benefit, in the long run, in terms of shaping his presidency.
And do you think that President Biden will ultimately fade into the background, or will he try to stay relevant? And which direction do you see being best for his legacy?
I think we just don't know fully what's going on with his health. And if his health is really fading, he might just fade. Because if he doesn't have the stamina and the strength to continue to be in the limelight, and I think he also will want to let Kamala Harris take over that limelight. And, like President George W. Bush, when he left office, he didn't talk. He was very receded from the public. And a lot of presidents choose to do that because they want their successor to have the opportunity to shine and to be seen as the leader. And so I would think that he would follow that example of others who have gone before him. And, he's passed the torch. He's passed the baton to his Vice President, Kamala Harris.
And in terms of history and legacy, we do see that his vice presidential choice was an historic choice. How do you see that factoring into history, as well as now her being at the top of the ticket?
Well, I think a lot of it will depend on what happens with the election and who comes out on top. But you can't take anything away from the fact that she was the first Black woman to become vice president, and she may be the first Black woman to become an Asian woman to become president. And certainly, if someone else maybe becomes the nominee, she could step in and finish out President Biden's term and give her that place in history, regardless of what happens in November. So I could see that happening as a possibility as well.
Now, there's a lot of potential candidates being floated outside of Kamala Harris. There's that discussion. There's also the discussion of who she may choose to be her vice presidential pick. A lot of these really potential good Democratic candidates to run on the top of the ticket aren't being talked about in the vice president to be a potential vice president because of their gender. Gretchen Whitmer, Michelle Obama. What do you make of this whole, palace intrigue of who's next and what's next?
Well, I think that if I were Kamala Harris, if I were the vice president, I would be looking at the electoral map, and I would choose a vice presidential nominee who could help me win a really critical state, whether that is Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, whether it's Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, although I think she said that she's not interested at this point. That's what I would think she would do, is to place someone on the ticket who's in a leadership position, who's been elected to office, but who can help bring in valuable electoral votes, because we're so far into the season of the election, and I think that would be prudent on her part.
What do you make of the likelihood of having two females on the ticket?
Well, I think that's a possibility. I'm not sure that it's likely, but it is feasible. I mean, the Democratic Party is much more focused on things like symbolism and putting forward the first, in terms of racial politics. Identity politics is very much an important part of the Democratic base, less so with the Republicans. And I think a lot of their constituency is the category of women. And so, I wouldn't ignore that could, be a possibility. I think that is a possibility. I'm not sure it's a likelihood, but I could see that might be some pizzazz to the ticket that's definitely historic to
Just
women on the ticket.
One last quick question out of curiosity. We know that former President Barack Obama cannot run for president because he's fulfilled his 2 terms, but could he potentially be a vice president?
I would not think so, because because of the possibility of him stepping into the presidency. I think that would be dicey. I think it would be more likely that he would want to put forward Michelle Obama into the ticket somehow, rather than him personally taking that vice presidential role. It's really hard for a president to step back and be the vice president. I think that would be a difficult thing to pull off. So,
Jane Hampton Cook, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And coming up, more discussion on President Biden's decision to drop out of the 2024 race and what's next for Vice President Kamala Harris. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
There are real consequences to controlled media. And NTD's founders know them firsthand. Our freedom of thought is the price. This is the lesson that guides us in everything we do.
So there's the tear gas there.
We know the value of a free society. And we take seriously the responsibility to preserve it. We are NTD.
Do you know that Cars for Compassion is the best way to donate your car? Through this non-profit program, you can not only help us keep bringing the world independent and daringly truthful journalism, but also significantly impact the life of somebody who needs a vehicle. The Epoch Times fights misinformation and big tech censorship by being independent and unbound to advertisers. Every single contribution to Cars for Compassion is a powerful endorsement of our unwavering mission. All you have to do is go to carsforcompassion.org and let us know about your car, and we'll schedule a pickup time and email you a tax-deductible receipt. To do this, just click the link below. Support truth, compassion, and hope. Donate your car right now at www.carsforcompassion.org.
Looking for a healthy and smooth-tasting brew? Drop by Days Coffee Roasters today and explore our wide selection of specialty-grade, small-batch roasted coffee. Home to North America's first enzyme-fermented coffee, we source a wide selection of specialty-grade coffee beans from around the world, and our baristas are ready to craft your customized brew. Visit Days Coffee at 28 North Street, Middletown, New York. Come experience a brew like no other.
And welcome back to NTD News. I'm Steve Lance. Breaking news today, President Biden has dropped out of the presidential race. He says he will finish out the remainder of his term, but says his re-election bid is now over. He's endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris for the Democratic Party nomination today. Joining us now live, again from the White House, is NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao. Good evening, Iris. What are the latest reactions that you're hearing?
So far, we're getting more and more reactions from Democrats after news that President Biden is dropping out of the 2024 race. And notably, we're collecting reactions from a list of potential Democrats who were considered contenders to replace Biden before this. And they include, for example, Maryland Governor Wes Moore, California Governor Newsom, and also Michigan Governor Whitmer, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, and Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear. And all of these people that I just talked about have all come out to thank President Biden for his leadership, but have stopped short of endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris like President Biden is calling for. Meanwhile, there are some others who were also considered to be potential contenders, but who have endorsed Kamala Harris, and they include Josh Shapiro, who said, "I will do everything I can to help elect Kamala Harris as this 47th President of the United States." Also, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, who said, "I couldn't be more confident that VP Kamala Harris is the right person to defeat Donald Trump," as well as North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper. All of them potentially could be vying for Kamala Harris's VP pick now that this ticket has changed. Meanwhile, we'll also have a response from First Lady Jill Biden's office, who said that down to the last hours of the decision only Biden could make, Jill Biden, she was, quote, supportive of whatever road he chose. She's his biggest believer, champion, and always on his side, and that trusted way only a spouse of almost 50 years can be. So as we are now hearing from Democrats after this breaking news today, we also heard the news that Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace says she will introduce a resolution when Congress returns to Washington on Monday to remove President Biden from office, calling on Vice President Kamala Harris and members of President's cabinet to invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare Biden, quote, incapable of executing the duties of his office. And that's what exactly former President Trump is talking about in his initial reaction to Biden dropping out today, saying that President Biden, if he cannot run for 4 more years, will not be able to carry out his remaining duties as the current president. So a lot unfolding as, of course, we wait for President Biden to make that nation, to address the nation in the coming days, and also when lawmakers return to D.C. tomorrow on Monday to hear more responses from them. Back to you.
NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tal live from the White House. Thank you, Iris. And joining us now for further discussion is Democratic strategist Theron Bond. Theron, thank you so much for joining. If I could first get your thoughts, Theron, how important do you think it is for voters to have Kamala stay at the top of the ticket?
Oh, that's a tough question. Wow. When we talk about representation and what it means to have a Black woman at the top of the ticket, it means a lot. But gosh, as many people as there are saying that they would like to see her stay on the ticket, there are equally as many people that understand that Democrats need a win in November, and we just aren't sure if Vice President Harris is the person to do that.
You raise, that's the million-dollar question. Where is the line in the balance, and how do the Democrats find out which path is more viable and address, I guess, the fact that she does have a certain unfavorability?
So right now, when President Joe Biden decided to pass the torch, what it did was open up a pathway of victory for Democrats that we didn't have before. So that was step one in the process. Right now, Democrats need to win over young voters. And by young voters, I mean Gen Z voters. I mean millennial voters. I mean Black and brown voters. I mean immigrant voters, voters in the LGBTQ plus voting bloc. There are so many voting blocs that generally align with the Democratic Party that have also been ignored by that very same party. Those are the voters that President Joe Biden has failed to engage up until this point effectively. And those will be the ones that whoever is at the top of the ticket for Democrats will need to be won over. And the question is there enough time for Vice President Harris to do that? Because if we haven't seen that energy from her the past 3.5 years, what is she going to do in the next 3.5 months?
How important would you say that some of these major endorsements that she's received thus far from the Clintons, President Biden are? And on the flip side, who else do you see voters potentially getting excited about?
I think we have to ask ourselves, are these same people that are now endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to ride to the top of the ticket, if these are the same folks that were pushing for President Joe Biden to remain on the ticket? And if those are the same folks, then we have to question their motives and what they really want for the party and how they see the party going forward, and if they're willing to sacrifice the young voters in all these previously ignored voting blocs. We simply can't afford to do that. What I would like to see are a diverse ticket. I would like to see some folks who have some military service background. I would like to see some published authors. I would like to see some folks who are advocates for social justice and very progressive issues. What I would like to see on the ticket, I would like to see Secretary Pete on the ticket. I would like to see a Governor Wes Moore on the ticket. I think there are so many iterations of what this ticket could look like, but it needs to be reflective of the diversity that exists within the Democratic Party, especially those voting blocks that have long been ignored.
I want to point out a name that you just mentioned that's actually picking up quite a bit of traction all of a sudden, which is the Maryland Governor Wes Moore. Relatively young, but a rising star in the Democratic Party. What can you tell us about him?
Absolutely. He was definitely on my list from the beginning. I take so much credit for introducing his name into the conversation and gleefully seeing more people hop on to the thought of him being on the ticket. You know, he served in Afghanistan. He was a previous White House fellow. He's a published author. He understands the television side, which will be a great juxtaposition to the reality star that we know former President Donald Trump is. We've seen him solve a crisis. We've seen him just carry himself in a very respectable manner. We've seen him exude the qualities that would be served well by someone as vice president. And so I could definitely see him in that capacity. He's close enough to DC to understand it, but far enough away to understand different regional issues. And I think he would be a great addition to the Democratic ticket.
And back to some of the complex nuances that you previously touched upon, which is motivation for wanting, somebody on the ticket or not. How much of this has to do with the presidential race and winning the top of the ticket versus making sure that the Democrats can maybe retain seats in the House and some of those down ballot races?
Democrats today will change American history. We went from having little to no hope, wondering what the office of the president will look like, wondering what our Congress will look like, wondering what our Senate will look like, to now having renewed hope and renewed faith in the political system. Now we have a pathway to victory as Democrats. Now we can worry just a little bit less about our Congress and our Senate being at risk, because these were things that by default were going to be a casualty of President Joe Biden being at the top of the ticket. Now that's no more. So now we're going to see a lot more money coming in. We're going to see a renewed energy. We're going to see a renewed interest. And now there is a strong possibility that voters who were extremely apathetic may now be able to be brought back into the fold, because they can see someone that they can believe in serve at the top of the ticket and will hopefully trickle down for down ballot races as well.
I want to get your thoughts on a name that oddly has not been really injected into the conversation as much as one might think, which is that of former First Lady Michelle Obama. She's talked about, not really being interested, but there's also the talk of really needing name recognition for the Democrats this late in the game. Do you think that she might weigh her chances?
Let me tell you, if Michelle Obama was on that ticket, I'd be doing everything I can, raising every dollar I can, doing whatever I could to ensure that she won. However, Michelle Obama has unfortunately expressed time and time again that it's just not something that she is willing to do. She was close enough to the office of the president when her husband, former President Barack Obama, served 2 terms. And, I think she just said, it's not for me. I think she did her part as a first lady at that time, and she said that was enough. I think she still enjoys some of the luxuries now because of her proximity to the office and former presidents and former first ladies, but she just doesn't want it, and I don't think that Democrats will be able to convince her. Does she have the name ID? Yes. Does she have the zest and willingness to do it? Unfortunately not. I would love to see her serve as president, but she is very adamant that she's not doing it, and I believe her.
So with that said, how important do you think that name recognition, name ID is where you have somebody like, Michelle Obama who has that, but yet Wes Moore from Maryland may not.
So I think with what happened to the Key Bridge, it kind of thrusted Governor Wes Moore into the limelight in a very unusual way. But what it did was allow the American people to see how he solves a crisis, to see how he remains calm in times of tragedy, to see how he works with affected families, affected voters, affected residents. And now he was pegged as a surrogate for President Joe Biden. And so he's been thrust into this limelight because he's done the right things and just has a natural aura about him that so many American people can relate to. I think that's the beauty of a balanced ticket, is that you have somebody that's the presidential candidate and then by default the vice president. So if they balance one another, whoever has more name recognition can certainly help bring the other person along. But I think he has enough to get by if he was the vice president nominee.
Theron, lastly, a key voting demographic that the Democrats have been struggling with as of late, according to polls, is the black vote. How do you anticipate Kamala Harris's presence being at the top of the ticket impacting the enthusiasm and turnout of black voters?
If I haven't had a million discussions about this over the past several months and certainly the past several hours, that's probably been the number one question. Black voters want to be heard. Black voters want to be engaged, and we want to be engaged not just when it's election time. And honestly, that's been kind of some of the rub with Vice President Harris, is that she's kind of been in the shadow of President Joe Biden these past 3.5 years. And now they're thrusting her into the forefront as if she's been there all along, done these great things and had all these accomplishments, but many black voters cannot name them. I think the excitement around her is because she is a black woman, and I think that's where the buck stops. Again, when we talk about representation, what it would mean to me as a black woman to see a black woman serve as president is priceless, but I think it has to be the right black woman, and I think that Democrats have to properly prepare the electorate for it to work out. And unfortunately, they haven't done so up to this point. If we ever want to see a black woman serve as president, we're going to have to do the work to prepare the electorate. If she is at the top of the ticket and she wins in November, it will purely be a miracle, and I will certainly be excited. But she's going to have to answer some policy questions that are lingering in the background of her trajectory and the forefront of many black voters' minds. And if she doesn't address those, then there will be people who will sit this one out, unfortunately, despite the fact that she's a black woman.
And to your point, I'm sure the Republicans are sharpening their swords right now with attack ads from the time when she was the Attorney General of California. With that said, we're getting reports that Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg has just addressed Kamala Harris, yet another high-level endorsement for the vice president.
I think what we're also seeing are potential vice president picks if current Vice President Kamala Harris becomes the presidential Democratic nominee. I think what we're seeing now are people endorse her who very well may be her vice presidential pick. I think that's a good sign. That means conversations are happening, but we honestly won't know until August who our Democratic nominee is going to be and who's going to be in the presidential slot and who's going to be in the vice presidential slot.
Theron Bond, Democratic strategist, and very fascinating analysis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And coming up, we'll have more discussion on how Republicans are reacting to President Biden's decision to exit the 2024 race. Stay tuned for that, and we'll be right back.
NTD News, the fastest growing independent news source in America, bringing you breaking news from around the world. Expert analysis, investigative reporting, and original award-winning documentaries. We're known for our uncensored China coverage you won't find anywhere else. We cover the stories that affect you and shape our world without the political noise. We report from the heart with you in mind. Watch us right here on NTD News.
The Kindness is Cool Video Awards are back for their second year. Record and nominate acts of kindness, both big and small, from individuals, families, and communities. Submit your videos on ganjingworld.com with the hashtag #KindnessIsCool. Win a $10,000 grand prize and be featured on a New York Times Square billboard. Visit ganjingworld.com and start sharing today. Kindness is cool.
There's a whirlwind of emotion and activity going on in this painting. And there's chaos all around and threat from below. The wolves surrounding her, and they're anything but unmoved. They're moving all the time, and we sense that. But this little girl remains unmoved.
She's in quite a perilous situation, but she's completely strong and serene, and she's actually meditating. It was very, very well liked because no matter what culture or what sort of walk of life you're from, I think people, they see it and they immediately understand what that energy, what that message is, and they're drawn to it because everybody kind of needs a little bit of that in their own life, of, you know, the steadfast calmness and something to hold on to. It's definitely an inner peace in the midst of something very chaotic, and for a lot of people right now, the whole world is very, very chaotic, so I guess that's another reason why so many people are very drawn to this.
And welcome back to NTD's special live coverage. I'm Steve Lance. President Biden announcing he's dropping out of the 2024 race and endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris. Joining us now to discuss is Bart Marcois, former presidential campaign policy advisor and former United States diplomat. Bart, great to have you back.
Good evening, Steve.
I guess, Bart, if we could, right off the top, get your initial reaction to this breaking and historic news.
Certainly. Well, it's certainly not unexpected. We thought this was coming. I personally have been predicting it since 2020, since before Biden was inaugurated, although I expected it would have taken place over a year ago. Biden clearly, even in 2020, was not prepared to go 4 years. He clearly is not prepared to go 4 more. I doubt he's really prepared to go another 4 months or 6 months to make it to the end of his term. So it's not surprising. What's sad about it is it looks to me like they've decided they know they can't win, and so they're throwing Kamala Harris to the wolves. She's the sacrificial lamb. They know they're going to lose, and so they're sending her out to lose and to get rid of her so that they don't have her around their necks for the next nomination cycle. It sounds very cynical, and again, I think it's very sad because she's somebody who could have had a capability had she had circumstances been different. But I don't see her seizing the brass ring and running with it.
Bart, with that said, we're learning that Democrats have raised about $27.5 million in the last 5 hours since President Biden has made the announcement that he will not be seeking re-election. One of our previous guests say that this may inject a new form of enthusiasm for Democrats and that they may have hope of winning. Do you think that this could become a challenge for the Republicans?
I don't think that the fundraising is relevant in any way. When you see it come in 5 hours like that and those amounts, it means that it was pre-planned so that they could have that announcement to make. That's a manipulation of the news cycle. And it doesn't mean any more enthusiasm among the grassroots. I reached out to sources in both the Trump campaign and in the Republican Party, and I can tell you that in the campaign, they pivoted to being prepared to run against Kamala Harris months ago, several months ago. President Trump started talking about her as a potential nominee, as a potential replacement for Joe Biden, and they've been furiously doing their homework and preparing to take her on ever since. They've also got briefing books ready for several of the other possible candidates, all the ones that have been mentioned, from Michelle Obama to, Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, Josh Shapiro, any of them. So they are ready. And the attitude that I spoke with somebody in a couple of people in the Virginia Republican Party. One said, look, we were always going to fight this as if we were 10 or 15 points behind, because we know we have to win by a margin of 10 or 15 points to make sure it's not taken away from us. And that person said what Trump is doing is giving us air cover. The convention gave out all these wonderful messages of unity and inclusion and excitement, and that's like softening the target. But it's still up to the Republican Party activists to go out door to door, knock on doors, register new voters, drag voters to the polls. Another source from the political apparatus, from the GOP, from the Republican Party, said, listen, with Kamala Harris in the lead, her campaign will be about gender, race, and abortion. That's all she's going to talk about. That's all the Democrats have to talk about. It has been a very effective attack field for them. They will go back to that playbook and they will attack on those three things. But President Trump has robbed them of those talking points. The Democrat Party is the one that's extremist on abortion. It's the Democrats who are out of step with nearly 90% of the American people by saying they want abortion on demand up until the moment of birth. Almost nobody in America wants that, and the Democrats do. That's part of their governing program. On race and gender, they're going to trot out the same old tired things and say Republican Party is full of people like Bart Marcois, old, white, and male. But the Republican Party is full of people who are nothing like me to look at, but are everything like me in terms of their patriotism, their love of country, their love of one another, and their love of principle and of justice and of freedom of speech. And that's what the Republican Party stands for.
Bart, there's quite a bit of attention that's being given to former President Barack Obama's statement following President Biden dropping out of the race, and more so the lack or the absence of his endorsement for Kamala Harris. How do you see in the next weeks leading up to the DNC convention things playing out? Will she be secured, or do you think that we will see other names start to emerge and there will potentially be this open or brokered convention?
Yeah, he said that he has complete faith that the party process and open convention will produce an outstanding nominee. And I can't help but wonder whether that nominee is named Michelle. I've always suspected, for all of her denials and all of the statements saying, please don't throw me in that briar patch, that I suspect that what she's really, that she would jump at the chance to be nominated. And I think she would jump at the chance to run without having to endure a bruising primary campaign, and with being able to run nothing but a negative campaign against President Trump. but I don't think it will work. What the Democrats are up against is they are choosing their nominee with a fundamentally undemocratic process. They are undercutting the very element of democracy, which is voting. They went through a primary. They rammed through Joe Biden as their nominee through the primary. They lied for 2 years about his ability. How many times have you seen those what do you call them, montages, where you have 100 people saying that Biden is sharp as a tack and he's at his best point? They were all lying. They all knew they were lying. We knew they were lying. And they tricked their voters into voting for Joe Biden. And now they're pulling the chair out from under the voters and saying, oh, we're just going to have an outstanding nominee. You all sit down on your hands and you take it.
Bart, we have 30 seconds. I just want to get your thoughts as to how you see the Trump campaign pivoting and how their message might differ now with Kamala at the top.
I don't think it will really differ. I don't think they have to pivot. Look back at the convention for what you saw. You saw a diverse array of people, age, sex, gender, race, ethnicity, working class, rich, poor. You had people from Amber Rose to Dana White, all saying Donald Trump is the guy because he loves America and we love America. Our message, the Republican message, is a message of positivity and patriotism and normalcy. That's not going to change.
Bart Marcois, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Good night.
And as we reach the end of our special coverage this evening, let's go to NTD's White House correspondent, Iris Tao, who will wrap up this historic day for us.
Good evening to you, Steve. So this is a historic day. President Biden just became the first ever presumptive nominee of a major party in modern U.S. history to drop out of a presidential race this late in the campaign. Of course, he's saying he's endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris, but questions remain about whether Kamala Harris can secure the unified support of the Democratic Party, especially given how delegates of the DNC are not bound to support Kamala Harris like Republican delegates are bound to support their nominee. So a lot of questions are coming up, and right now we also have latest news about who's jumping in to endorse Kamala Harris. Among them, some potential contenders who are considered contenders to replace President Biden on a Democratic ticket. So right now we have California Governor Gavin Newsom just getting behind Kamala Harris after stopping short of doing so in his initial statement, and also we have Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg saying he will do all that he can to help elect Kamala Harris, the next president of the United States. We know that Vice President Kamala Harris is making calls to Democrats both to consolidate support and potentially reaching out to his potential VP picks. And so right now a lot are coming out, especially given the White House now announcing that on Monday President Biden does not have any events scheduled, but starting on Tuesday additional details will be added. So a lot to watch for as we wait for that address from President Biden. Back to you.
NTD's Iris Tao, thank you for that excellent and thorough reporting throughout the evening live from the White House. And thank you for your continued coverage on this. And that's all for our special coverage this evening. For Round the Clock, original news and more updates, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD mobile app. Thank you all again for joining us. I'm Steve Lance, and have a great night.